one and all present here. My name is Drishti Khandelwal and I am from ICFI. Well, some people multitask between emails and meeting, but Sridala Swami multitasks between poetry, criticism, and redefining how literature speaks to the world. An acclaimed poet, scholar, critic, her work moves effortlessly between the person and the political, proving that words, when used well, are more powerful than any quarterly report. Her writing has won awards, sparked conversation, and reminded us that depth still matters in a fast forwarding world. Please welcome someone who turns language into leadership, Sridala Swami. Can we have a huge round of applause, please? Well, next I would like to introduce someone. If storytelling had a strategic consultant, it would look a lot like Afsar Mohammad. A celebrated poet, scholar, translator, he bridges languages, histories, and cultures, basically doing cross-functional collaboration long before it became a corporate buzzword. From poetry to translation to cultural commentary, his work ensures that story travel, evolve, and stay relevant. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a voice that connects tradition with today, Afsar Mohammad. Now, when creativity meets strategy, you get someone like Kazim Ali, a poet, novelist, essayist, and editor. His work travels across genres, geographies, and ideas. Proof that thought leadership doesn't have to stay in one vertical. With an impressive body of writing and years of shaping literary platforms and institutions, he brings both vision and execution to the table, rare skills in any industry. Please give a huge round of applause that combines imagination with intent, Kazim Ali.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being over here. Be in conversation this afternoon with both you and Afsar Kazim. Afsar, it's not your first session at the Hyde Lit Fest today, but today you're wearing the hat of a poet. I'd like to first begin by talking about the collections themselves. I mean, Kazim, yours is new and selected poems in the collection that I have, which is titled Sukoon. I'm sorry to say that Kazim's book is probably not available in the bookstore, but Afsar's is. So please do take a look later. And yours, Afsar, is a collection of translations from poems you've written in Telugu across 7 titles? 7 titles. I wanted to know, to begin with, how you decided to bring these collections together, why you felt this was the right time for a kind of a collected rather than an individual collection. So what was the organizing principle behind these collections of yours?
Thank you so much, everyone. So happy to see you all.
Can you hear him? Your mic is not on. The mic is not on.
It's not usual, is this okay? To see such an audience for poetry. So that means that there is something beautiful here in terms of poetry. Of course, Kazim Bhai is here. Big. So actually my story is little like, of course, even before I started teaching at the University of Texas, Austin, I published like several volumes of poetry in Telugu. And then when I arrived in Texas, one American student, she took my language courses, Telugu. And then when I gave a recital in, like, on the campus, she immediately fell in love with the recitation. And then she really loved the words, actually, not about poetry, it's about words. Telugu, the way Telugu sounds, the music of this language, the rhythm of this language. And then she came to me, I'm going to learn Telugu now. She just took my literature classes before. And then, but I kind of tried to discourage her. It's not an easy language. It's a very difficult language. but she was so like persistent. And then she took 3 years of Telugu with me. After that, one fine morning, she came with this idea that we should translate your poems into English. And then, so the way we kind of selected a few poems from my like almost 8 volumes of Telugu poetry. We just selected like 40 poems. And then every day, rather than meeting outside the class, we meet and then read the poem to each other. I'll read in Telugu, and then she will again read it in Telugu, in American accent. And then she would come up with a draft in a week. And then we like exchange the drafts. So that is the story of this book, Evening with a Sufi. And then when this was published, actually we did, it's a lot of work, like at least we spent like, even after she graduated from poetry program at University of Texas. She worked with famous American poets like Kevin Young, right? So later of course, she's now teaching poetry somewhere in Virginia. But later, when she graduated, then we kind of started exchanging the drafts and then sending it out. So that is a long journey.
Yeah. Kazim, what about this collection? Because it brings together work from 2005 onwards, from your very first collection.
Yeah, timing-wise, it was, we were in the pandemic, like COVID time, so it was at home. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was working on a new book of poetry at that time. But every time I put together a book of poetry, it seems like I'm writing these poems over the course of many years. And each of my books from the beginning, they seem to alternate in form. Either they gather poems together from across 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, or it's something I write so quickly and tightly. So my first book, The Far Mosque, that's poems from over probably 5 years. Then my second book, The 40th Day, I wrote the first draft of the poems in one single afternoon. I wrote like 50 pages of poetry.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so it kept going back and forth like that. My book, Inquisition, is poems from across almost 8 years. My book, Bright Felon, I wrote it in 3 months. So at a certain point in time, I was thinking about, and I was constantly writing, and I have this maybe like a missing bone in my body where I feel like every single thing, like every year I want to publish something, like how Prince puts out a record album. Every year he has a record album, he puts it out. So I always wanted to put something out, and I had all of these
I think
books.
that's an American thing.
Being
Being in academia in America, I think forces
to
you
produce
to
something,
publish often. You know what I realized reading both your collections is that the common themes, if you could call it a theme at all, is that, and as is the title of the session, this idea of Sufiana or Sufism, runs through your work in different ways. So, Kazim, you have written often, not just in your poetry, but in your non-fiction, if we could call it that, about spirituality, about meditation, about fasting, about yoga, about all of those things, which are what we would understand as spiritualism or related to Sufism. Whereas, Afsar, you have explicitly said that for you, Sufism is a form of resistance. So I would like both of you to tease this idea out about what Sufism means to you, whether there's any element of spirituality, and what resistance has to do with that.
Thank you so much, Sridala. That question is very interesting, not just in terms of my poetic creative being, but also in terms of the making of my personality and also my academic scholarship. I started my writings with the narratives of Muharram, which is called the Festival of Peers Perla Pandaga in Telugu, which actually translates into, it's not Moharam in traditional Shi model, right? So when they're using the idea of Peer, saint, they're translating this entire Moharam context into a Sufi Peer context. So I started exploring the question, why? What happens to Husainiyat? What happens to Karbala? What happens to like the family of the Prophet when you are talking about this kind of sainthood practice? So I started asking myself, oh, there should be something here which local communities identify with. So I grew up in a very small village in Telangana where Sufi shrine culture is at the center of their life, everyday life, and then also in like very exclusive days like Urus and all these things. So I started connecting this idea of P with my childhood experiences. And then I realized that, as usually, we kind of always talk about Sufism as something connected to spirituality, right? It is like a mystical dimension of Islam. That is the only definition we talk about. But in my experience, it's nothing, there is mystical dimension there, but it's more than that. If you go to these villages, you see that they are talking about protest. They're talking about resistance. This is a resistance against casteism. So when you like follow a peer, there is no caste, which is not allowed in normative Hindu practice, right? So it's a challenge to normative, traditional Hindu devotionalism. So that is where I actually, like, it's a one layer of resistance. And then there are other layers of resistance when the local peers, they speak about these distinctions like haves and have-nots, which we usually talk about in Marxian discourse. So I kind of started thinking, okay, what these stories like speak mostly about? They speak about these distinctions, but they don't see any difference. When they are participating within this local Sufi space, there is no distinction between haves, rich and poor. It is similar to what you see in Kannada Vachana Kavita, Vachana poems, in particular like Akka Mahadevi and other poets, like where they were challenging the hierarchies, caste hierarchies, social hierarchies, devotional hierarchies. So I want to see Sufism from that context.
I think I'm an accidental Sufi. I never studied, I never learned formally, I never had a teacher. It was other people who was reading my work and applying that label to me and writing about my work and explaining how it was, engaging with the ideas of Sufism. I was educated in Vedanta and Upanishads and the ancient yogic texts, and I was coming from that. And so insofar as there may be some intersection between Sufi ideas and yogic ideas, which I think there are, that came into play. But for me, when you enter the poem, the field of the poem, the emptiness of the page, the silence that begins the poem, one enters into it not as, I think one surrenders one's own social self, even the linguistically constructed self, because one's changing one's relationship to language rather than language as a medium of communication to conduct commerce or politics or our daily life. We're entering into a space of anarchy almost. And so in that sense, in the yogic question would be like, who is the self that speaks? Who is I, in other words? And insofar as one does that, one is disappearing that self and trying to have a different relationship to, who speaks in the poem, actually. And I found myself drawn to experimental traditions in poetry precisely because, and maybe a more language-based poetry, sonic-based poetry, because the self maybe kind of disappears. This is Gertrude Stein's idea too, right? To disappear in language, to make the language become pure sound, because she was interested in abstract art. And the curse/blessing is, of course, words always mean something. And they always mean something when they come out of your mouth versus my mouth versus your mouth, and they mean something different. So there's a negotiation between the disappearance of the self and the self that exists.
You know, that's, you're talking about being drawn to language, poetry, sonic, and all of that. And which very neatly brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is that both of you translate. I mean, you have translated your own work, and you translate from the French. So this is not the same question addressed to both of you, because it can't be, but I want to ask you, Afsar, what you felt like when you were translating your own poems, because you were, you speak across languages. Your next book is a collection of poetry which you've directly written in English. And you are a co-translator of these, the poems in this collection. So, as a translator, I wonder, working with a co-translator, how much you want to explain the poem, because sometimes you're trying to express certain ideas that may not be very translatable. And I think you've also chosen poems that you can work with. So do you find yourself explaining your poem in a way that you would destroy it if you explained it, in order to be able to translate it? And I'll ask you your question about language once Afsar is done.
Thank you. Thank you. So for me, translation is an act of cultural exchange. It's not about language. It is beyond language. So when you think about Telugu, the relationship between Telugu and Urdu, particularly because most of the materials related to Sufism, or even like mainstream literature within Telugu literary culture, they are heavily influenced by Urdu. So I actually wanted to see how this exchange works, right? And then when I translate into English, it's a different negotiation, right? So English is something foreign, alien in terms of language. But when I started teaching in USA, I realized that actually when it comes to poetry or short fiction or some memoir, you actually don't see that much difference, whether it is Telugu, Urdu, or English, or maybe French. Kazim Bhai would know that. So my effort in this case is to see what are the commonalities here. What is the thing that binds, connects these different languages? It's easier to translate from Telugu to Urdu or Urdu to Telugu, but it is not easier. Same kind of activity between Telugu, Urdu to English, right? So actually currently, me and of course some of you are familiar with one of the foremost Hyderabadi scholars who actually published a book on Ma Lakhabai Chanda, Scott Kugel. Me and Scott, we are working on 100 poems from Deccan, 100 Sufi poems from Deccan. He is translating from Urdu, me from Telugu. It's going to be out soon. Hopefully, inshallah, this year or next year. So the idea is we're basically trying to see this connection. So when it comes to Sufism, this particular devotionalism, that connection becomes so explicit. All the terminology they use in Telugu, whether in oral narratives or written narratives or like everyday conversations, they're all basically Sufi terms, including Sukoon, the term we are fascinated with. So why this kind of usage in everyday life? While on the other side, we are trying to disconnect these different language worlds. So the Urdu is Muslim language, Telugu is some Hindu language. So we are trying to create this, what we call disconnect, right? It's an artificial disconnect. So poetry, for me, when I translate this from Telugu, Urdu to English, I actually challenge that disconnect. I actually embrace that idiom of everyday life, which is like a combination of both Telugu, Urdu terms. And then why these terms are being used in everyday life? Why at the political front, you're trying to separate the people in the name of language, religion, and other aspects? Why everyday life? And then these ordinary people like connect these different languages and then try to come up with a different alternative discourse. That is where I came up with this idea that, oh yeah, Sufism is something that is not like mystical. It is mystical, no doubt, but at the same time, it is like serving a social purpose, creating meaningful connections among different caste groups and then communities in a local setting. That's what I learned from translation.
Kazim, I think the question about language that I'd like to ask you is, it's very clear just looking through any poem, you just open any poem from your earliest to your most recent ones. That sound matters so much to you. You're so playful with words. You riff off homophones. You pack your lines in with that kind of. I wouldn't even say rhyme, but that's what it amounts to when you speak it out. So, in a sense, your poetry is meant to be spoken, is meant to be heard. But at the same time, you speak so much about, and even with your Sukoon, you say, as a punctuation, it is a moment of a pause where a sound is not vocalized. So you're simultaneously, there's a tension between what cannot be said, but the sound of your attempts to say it is so important to the poetry. So can you please talk about your relationship with words, with language, and with sound?
Yeah, thank you so much for those observations too, and the question. It is. Oh yeah, I'm back. It is. No, I'm gone again. Okay. Hello. God wanted to know what I had to say about sound without the amplification of my voice. It is kinetic. The body itself is kinetic. The breath that moves through the body to pronounce the poem is kinetic. And our language, with its structure, its syntactical structure of the sentence, is meant to make sense. And the practical answer is that I grew up with many languages in my early childhood. Between 0 and 2, I spoke 4, or as I came into language, I was coming into a multilingual house in Vellore, and there was English spoken in the house, there was Urdu spoken in that house, there was Farsi spoken in that house, there was Tamil spoken in that house, so depending on who was talking to me. And so as my parents explained to me, as I was a toddler and child beginning to speak, I just used words from all of the different languages, and as I learned to start putting together sentences, I began putting together sentences with all of the different grammars of all of the different languages. And even though the only language I know now is English, I think somewhere inside my synaptic pathways, I'm lost. I access those old moments of dizziness, of not knowing, I think is accessed in poetry. And so on the page you can see it. And so some of my poems are small and with lighter margins, shorter lines. The visual field, you can take it all in at once. And then some of them have these really long lines, like so long lines that they wrap around the page. And within the line, there's no punctuation, so you kind of get lost in it, almost like a water waving, wave crashing. And so the reader has to enter the poem and take agency to understand. It's not quite simply said like in the beautiful syntax of Emily Dickinson, though broken up with the dashes to create some sense of discomfort, but in the lines that I'm writing, you can be completely lost inside them. And so when I read them, sometimes I read them kind of quickly, because then you will get disoriented and you will experience that sense of loss. And then sometimes I actually slow down when I read it so much to suspend the phrases and suspend the words, to prevent you from making the immediate connection of understanding what thought follows what thought. So it's like an unsequencing either way. And I didn't listen to a lot of Indian classical music until much later on. And I'm not educated, I don't know a lot about it. But when you listen to that kind of music, when they start with the rag and they start very slowly and they build up the structure, and then at a certain point in the song, they just go wild, and your brain can kind of uncouple a little bit, and you kind of riding the waves of sound, you know? And if you do a little bit of herb before and listen, then you really start to understand, you know, the nature of the universe, all the relationships. Poonam was talking about the relationship of time earlier, you know. You start to understand the quantum mechanics of the world. It's like the music, it's the sound vibrations of the world. And that's what physics also tells you, as well as Hazrat Inayat Khan tells you that what there was before the Big Bang is sound. So the universe was actually literally created by sound. And it's still, the echo of the Big Bang is still, we're still vibrating with it.
None of which will make as much sense as it will if you actually hear the poets read. So I'm now going to ask both of you to read for between 7 and 10 minutes, I think, given the time. I don't know, but like, say between 5 poems to 7 minutes, whichever is more satisfying.
Just reading the poems. Anything's broken. Anything is broken. I'm actually. Is this working? Yeah. So I'm actually going to read a poem about a topic that you are so familiar in the context of Hyderabad. Iftar siren. I love when it screams the end of my fast. Oh, are you talking about the month of Eid? It is real fasting when you can eat twice in a day of your life. I rarely see a sun burning all day in the oven. Amma is an earth who wanders around. Suns that burn without rest in an empty stomach. Do you know how my morning breaks at the call of the prayer? Does the call for prayer know of empty stomach? Can an empty stomach speak at that hour? The call that travels the world is an empty belly when it reaches the mosque. Qibla turning deep in the emptiness. What a great life in the holy month. Do you see how you are all becoming pure, Pak? I have been like this for years, burning in the divine fire, unable to turn into ashes. I'm a fire pit you try and try to stamp out. Yes, the fire pit is tired too. Do you know my father? He is never tired of giving calls for prayers. And do you know how many of them are just calls for food? 5:20 p.m., time for iftar, release from the fasting, and the clock, lazy at that moment, begins to limp towards evening. And that one banana, those pieces of bread and the juice, they haunt me all day long. I love the food's great flavor. The iftar smells all food for me. Let me grab just this one snack. This holy month, the rest of the days, I remain fasting anyway, all year. Do you see how poor am I? Thank you. Oh, okay.
Can you read the SD card?
All right. Oh, another Hyderabadi poem. I'm so fascinated by Hyderabad, as you can see that. Across from the Charminar. You see how one butterfly left us a trace of its color before killing itself on this busy street? Here, 1,000 people, one then the other, crossed and walked on without even looking. Any afternoon, when the sun smiles like a white flower on the head of the Charminar, just walk straight into his look. It is not so hard to pour one look into an ever-burning oven, a house of molten sides. Here where the butterfly forgot its color and flew off into the dark, stay and stare straight into life. Tell me how it looks. The 1,000 people who walked, limped and ran by this road, told me at least 1,000 lies, but in innocent tongues. Thank you. Okay, sorry, I have all Hyderabadi poems here. A rain, right? A rain lost in Hyderabad. Since there is nothing like evening here, I just dream an evening in every bit of my sleep. When the trees erase their shades, when the sky dries out its final sunshine, a cold wave scoops me. I rush to my nest and hide in its wings before the dark night takes me. Never know if this was raining since morning or just began this noon. The lives that unfurl in the noons don't know morning breezes. We are all late Latifs in Hyderabad, right? Getting up past noon, I realized the alarm was tired of alarming me and sighed itself off. I am best at reading time in reverse. I am the crooked one who is born when all the rains and winters lose their hope of moving. Hyderabad is my altered self. Hyderabad is my altered self, a dreamless sleep, a sleepless dream, a waking sleep under a nap. Thank you. One more, right? This is actually the title poem, Evening with a Sufi, written in the memory of, maybe it's also Hyderabadi, so to a certain extent, Wali Gujarati, whose grave was demolished during the riots in Gujarat, right? Evening with a Sufi. I will never know the fate of my worn out cap. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and tied it on my head. It is not right for the human man to sway. The doors tightened on the still closed grave, waiting for the evening prayer. When the call sounded, the sparrows flung up in joy and reached home. After the evening prayer, I knew the body of the Sufi by the embroidered cloth that covered him for many 100 years. I bent my body down to his feet, reciting verses. 2 eyes changed to 2 tears that shone on the embroidered cloth, chadar. The tears changed to 2 sparrows flung up into nowhere. I had gone somewhere inside him. I couldn't come out. His memory is like a worn Arabic text. I am afraid to open, afraid I will tear it. But once I made a pilgrimage there, how can this make sense? As I was leaving the shrine, something exploded into a cloud of sparrows, then a flurry of severed wings. Everyone was running here and there, screaming. I ran into the shrine, again, into the shrine's pure silence. Now I watch a sparrow with its bleeding beak writing something on the grave, trying to translate its pain. Where will I go now? Where will I go now? There is a grave to dig within me. There is a grave to dig within me. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm going to read this. There's a poem that's in this book that is, it's either a one long poem with 40 stanzas, or it's a sequence of 40 different sonnets. And so each sonnet on the page is small, but like I said earlier, the lines don't wrap around properly. There's no punctuation in them. The breaks happen in weird places, so they really are intended to be music. And I'll just read several of these. That will be my reading. I'll read a group of them. The poem is called The Voice of Sheila Chandra. Sheila Chandra was a British Indian singer who came up in the late 80s, early 90s. And in the beginning, she was just a traditional kind of pop singer who sang with a group called Monsoon that did pop songs, but with a little bit of Indian influence in the sound. So she's part of that world music scene from the 1990s. But she became more and more interested in Indian vocalization techniques, and started to imitate doing the conical drumming vocalization, and she became really interested in drones. So she did an album where she was just making drones with her voice, you know, overlaying the tracks. She had some pretty mainstream success in 2008 when one of her songs was part of the Lord of the Rings, on this Lord of the Rings soundtrack. But that same year, she developed a neurological condition called burning mouth syndrome, which has no known cause nor cure, that rendered her unable to sing anymore. She can speak sparingly. She speaks for about 20 minutes to half an hour a day, but she had to learn how to speak through physical therapy. But she cannot sing anymore. So I became interested in that, the muteness and the music of words. So the poems try to imitate that a little bit. So these are sonnets from The Voice of Sheila Chandra. Breaks is constant, was like the river, light on the river, riven that remained a rift, an old rill that sounded, she verged with the vibration of the drum, a hum, a home, womb, and she, moaned in the loam, dark earth, come, Sheila, dame, ocean, dome, this poem, roam to tome, tomb, foam, original fountain that fed my mom, Zamzam, when I was born. Long before she lost it, drifts unanchored, wanted to merge, and the body of the singer became the body of the instrument. Talk to the drum, find it hum, study its vowels. She made her vow to sound slowly by syllable. She pronounced words in Uzbek. Word unmoored, word pure sound, river, oh, long had I been, long seasons invaded by your current, devoured your tongue of water. Those years time bent, my one voice spoke. Carried cacophony, world, wheel, into the human one small voice box pool, swum midnight, we went into the sea, expecting our prayers might carry themselves across the silver slammed surface, would be answered, or do they answer? Pale cut of prayers do not answer, like back into the dark water. What are those stripes of light across the room, a shape that evaporates upon waking? What language cannot hold on to, what you cannot hold on to? How to transcribe what flickers, what is not fixed, that voice, letters made not of ink but light, not words of fire on stone. How do you transcribe the blank vowel, all the after that aerates, not disappear, but settle down through air? You do not want to say, but sing, where might be rain, be sky come down by snow, but no, you invite it in to cover you, the blanket, your coat, a heavy pressure, God, pressure of rain. You want to start the song over, but do not dare to be ready to tune, no cadence, nothing to pick up, no bridge to cross, now to be small again, break through. There is no beginning to any song, only the place the singer picks up the tune. Thank you. If I have a little time, I'll do another group. Okay, I'm just going to continue in here.
Maybe another 2 or 3.
Okay.
Then I'll open it out to questions.
Okay, good. Yeah. What represses, unhomes in the sound? Who has made me? What is made me? Is a voice just muscles and shape and breath to phrase a song? Boats assemble at the mouth of the harbor, mouth in earth. You who wrote an ode to silence never wrote of what is silenced. I did seek all resounding caves. Let the voice be lit. All the lanterns in the new world, we need the language of stone. From string to string, quiver in the opening, the garden so beautiful. Lucifer, dark son of morning, no Eden but innocence, no expulsion but after. Music spent my breath to achieve or invent, death, each chord or cadence out of reach, out of tune. Last time in this town I promised, vow or vowel, to turn my back forever on chaos and give myself instead to music, organizing itself in my ear. From chaos, a river made rather than music that makes a shape of endless seconds. I devoted myself to the equation of numbers between each sound, a formula that matches planets and atoms. Music is not an art, but science. I could have remained alive, but I broke. And then I'll close with this final little one. No more will I listen to other than a single note moaned not known. I do not hear think again what place presents here a body as a battery of the one moment to open your mouth, to plug in. I will allow what I invented to find its color, make a shape which neither water nor sky do. How do you now in this contained shape go through your life not like a constellation, not guessed at, intuited, or divined, no name. So how do you discern a shape for what is often called God?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for your reading. I'd like to open this out to the audience now, if anyone has a question. I think, we have maybe 5 minutes. So I'll take 3 questions from the audience. Okay, first this lady over here.
Doctor, and I'm been reading about Sufism and Sukoon, and it was interesting that you extended the understanding of Sufism as not only just mysticism, but also as sort of a rebellion or as a voice of people who don't want to conform. And obviously there are people who always conform, and there are people like me and others who don't. And when you said that it's a voice against the caste people, then one would like to extend and say it's also the voice of people who don't want to be within Sunni and Shia, or in Kashmir we have the Sayyids and the Dars who don't marry. And then when you look at it beyond the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East, how does it translate into the West, where you are working now? I'm sure that there's something like Sufism. They may not be calling it Sufism and Sukoon, but there are communities who would be doing the same thing in their milieu. So that was my question, that how do you look at it from those societies, and what do they call it, and how do they navigate this non-conformism, which we label as Sufism and Sukoon in our part of the world?
Is it addressed to both or just to Afsar?
They are both in India and abroad, and they are living in both the societies, and they've lived through Sufism and Sukoon, so maybe both of them, they may have a different perspective.
Thank you for the question. So, to get to the response and the idea of Sukoon and the Sufi in everyday context, most of my poems, they borrow so much from oral poetry. So, for instance, when I was conducting field research on Muharram practices, I actually documented one long narrative that goes for 3 hours in a single night. The long narrative begins with, Fatima is Sita. See, Fatima and Sita. Fatima is Sita. Sita is Fatima. Ali is Ram. Ram is Ali. Lawa is Hussein. Kusha is Hassan. So this is a very common narrative trope in many Telangana and then Rayalaseema villages particularly like. And then this is actually 30 pages long poem. So what I learned from this poem is that, so why they kind of connect Rama with Ali? Why do they connect Fatima with Sita? Why? What are they doing within this sainthood narrative? So this is one of the secrets that I learned. Okay, this is what, like going back to your question, so this is one of the sources of resistance. This is basically happening in the structure of the poem. And this becomes a mythopoem in that way, right? They are borrowing from Ramayana, they are borrowing from Karbala story, right? So my question was, when they were performing, why I was keep asking myself, oh my gosh, what they are doing in this song, how could they connect two different diverse, like opposing viewpoints of religion and devotionalism, right? But in this world, there is no such opposition. It's a blended reality of Hindu epics and then Muslim histories. So that is where they challenge the idea of caste, social hierarchy, divine hierarchy, and propose a new discourse that aims at pluralism. So that pluralist structure, narrative tropes, those narrative tropes, they create this casteless being. So basically...
So it happens through the art itself,
right,
rather than through discourse or to thinking about it. It happens via the art and via the form of the art itself.
Right.
Kazim, do you have anything to...
Well, I just want to say, I mean, if we're talking about a Western context, what you don't really have is a commonality of approach or a common vocabulary to be able to talk about some of these things. There's like maybe the Christian dominant belief system that people might know the basics of, but as far as the body of philosophical thought and theological thought, there's not quite an analog to what you have in South Asia, where there really is a common understanding of the body of knowledge. So there's so many different approaches, but that's also what makes it exciting. People are coming from like radically different perspectives and often coming up with like being completely uneducated, and the full tradition means not being bound by some of the limitations and strictures, and so people coming up with very innovative new approaches to both spiritual understanding but also actual spiritual practice.
Your question.
Sir, we have Urdu poet Mirza Ghalib. He says, "ये मसाइल ये तसव्वुफ ये तेरा बयान गालिब तुझे हम वली समझते जुदा मारा खार होता." Like that, he has written many Sufi verses. So, do you consider him as a Sufi poet, or we have to see his life history also?
Thank you for bringing. How could you talk about poetry without Ghalib? Right? So, of course, there are a lot of issues about Ghalib's like content and form. But for me, he was like a Sufi poet, challenging the state practices, contesting the official the mechanism of like what we call like upper level hierarchies, right? But what I got from his model, there are like so many poems that teach you about humanity, but this humanity also is not like a very abstract idea of humanity, right? He's proposing a concrete idea of humanity that is grounded in the everyday life of Delhi, right? He was addressing the questions and concerns related to the hierarchy of that particular city. And then that is what actually we read Ghalib as a more, like even in Telugu, we read him as like a romantic ghazal writer, which is like a big lie, right? So there's a similar happening in the case of other Sufi poets as well, like Rumi, Hafiz. All these poets, we just read them as romantic poets, which is like historically not true. Rumi, throughout his life, he regretted for not being able to write in Turkish. He ended up in Farsi. Then Hafiz, all throughout his life, he wrote about Hindu narrative practices. So what is happening within this domain is that they are trying to bring up and then open up a discourse, a debate on like, okay, how could we live in this context, and then embrace Sufi ideas to your own life, your own self. So this is a negotiation between self and then external world. That's what I got. Thank you.
My question is for Kazim. In the readings, I mean, in the artists you mentioned, Gertrude Stein, Dickinson, or Sheila Chandra, who all happen to be women, and the readings themselves, where I heard a more modern consciousness of the body, almost feminine, if I may interpret it that way, which felt like a alterity to traditional Sufism's tradition. So I wanted to understand your personal connection back to Sufism, or why you think of this collection as placing in that tradition, either deviating or circling back.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think I'm an accidental Sufi. And if I'm an accidental Sufi, then I'm probably a bad Sufi because I do it without intention. But I think I'm a bad Muslim. I think I'm a bad yogi. I think I'm a bad son, you know. I've just left all those things behind. I'm wandering in the wilderness a little bit. I'm off the map. There's no GPS for where I'm going, you know. I've given all that up. I'm a nomad. I have a home, but I have no allegiance to country. I'm faithless, feckless, a traitor, treasonous. I'm treasonous, with no reason for such a condition other than love for what I don't know, for everybody, everyone here and in the world, you know. I'm just desperate. That we have such a little time. We enter this world, we have no idea what we're doing. We can't speak. Our parents teach us. We live within these lines, And then suddenly we have a little bit of time to figure something out before the next go around, you know? A little bit of time to live, to really live in the world. In Surah Rahman, there's a refrain of, I'm not going to say the Arabic because I can't remember it, but it's like, which one of these bounties are not for you? Which one of these are you going to turn your back on? Which one of them are you going to return nothing? So it begs the question, does the world exist to be lived and experienced, or does the world exist to set you free?
That's a fantastic note on which to end this session. And thank you everyone for your attention and for being here and listening so carefully. Thank you to Afsar and thank you to Kazim for reading beautifully.